6:17 a.m. Gulf of Oman, 52 nautical miles east of the Strait of Hormuz. An Iranian speedboat just opened fire on USNS Pecos. 8 rounds from a DShK heavy machine gun, 12.7 millimeters, belt-fed, capable of 600 rounds per minute, stitched a line across the water from 180 meters on the port quarter and walked directly up the hull of the Navy auxiliary oiler, impacting the port-side cargo pump house in a pattern that left 7 distinct puncture marks in the steel cladding between frames 89 and 97. No penetration of the inner hull? The pump house cladding was 8mm steel. The rounds made craters, not holes. But the USNS Pecos is not a warship. It is a 677-foot fleet replenishment oiler, carrying 156,000 barrels of fuel, diesel and aviation gas. Designated for USS Abraham Lincoln's strike group. Operating 140 nautical miles to the southeast, its crew of 21 civilian mariners and 98 Navy personnel has no offensive armament. Its single-point .50 caliber machine gun on the bow was unmanned when the first rounds hit. The sailor assigned to that station was still running from the berthing spaces when the DShK fell silent, and the 5 additional Iranian speedboats closing from 3 different bearings had not fired yet. Welcome to Navy Combat USA. This is the morning Iranian forces attacked a U.S. Navy fuel ship in the Gulf of Oman, and the helicopter response that reached the engagement before the second salvo could be fired. USNS Pecos had departed Jebel Ali, UAE, 18 hours earlier on a direct transit to the Lincoln Strike Group's operating area southeast of the Gulf of Oman. The transit route was standard, the same route that Fifth Fleet logistics vessels had been using for years to move fuel between Gulf ports and strike group operating areas in the Arabian Sea. Standard meant predictable. The transit route had been filed in the Standard Logistics Movement Order that coordinated fuel deliveries across the Fifth Fleet area of operations. The movement order was transmitted through encrypted communications channels, but the vessel's AIS, Automatic Identification System, was broadcasting its position, course, and speed on the international maritime frequency in compliance with international maritime law requirements for civilian-flagged vessels. USNS Pecos was civilian-flagged. Its AIS was on. Every vessel in the Gulf of Oman, with a standard maritime radio, could track the Pecos's exact position in real time. The IRGCN monitoring station at Bandar Abbas maintained continuous AIS tracking of all significant vessels in the Gulf of Oman approach area. The Pecos had been tracked from the moment it cleared the Strait of Hormuz. The 5 speedboats and 1 bog hammer that launched from a forward IRGCN position at approximately 5:40 a.m., 37 minutes before the first shots, had the Pecos's current position, course, and speed from the AIS feed. The intercept was not navigation, it was arithmetic. The 6 Iranian contacts had been detected at 6:04 a.m. by the Pecos's bridge radar, 13 minutes before the shooting, as they cleared a coastal radar shadow near the Iranian coast and entered the open water of the Gulf of Oman at high speed. Bridge Watch Officer Chief Warrant Officer David Santos assessed the 6 contacts immediately as fast-moving small craft on an intercept vector. He transmitted on bridge-to-bridge channel 16 at 6:05 a.m. No response. He transmitted again at 6:07 a.m. with the Pecos's position, hull number, and status as a U.S. Navy auxiliary vessel. No response. At 6:09 a.m., Santos notified Commanding Officer Commander Patricia Webb, the same officer who had handled the Rappahannock incident months earlier, now in command of the Pecos on a rotation. Webb was on the bridge in 62 seconds. She looked at the 6 contacts on the radar. Range, 6.4 nautical miles. Speed, approximately 48 knots on direct intercept. She transmitted the potential hostile action report to Fifth Fleet at 6:11 a.m. and ordered all hands to emergency stations. Then she assessed her options. The Pecos had 1.50 caliber machine gun on the bow. It was unmanned. The crew was still responding to the emergency station's call. The Pecos had 156,000 barrels of fuel. A .50 caliber machine gun fight around 156,000 barrels of diesel and aviation gas is an extraordinarily bad situation regardless of who wins the engagement. Webb's calculus was not about fighting back. It was about buying time for the assets that she knew were inbound, if Fifth Fleet responded fast enough. At Fifth Fleet, Webb's potential hostile action report arrived at 6:11 a.m. and 28 seconds. Commander Maria Santos, no relation to the Pecos's bridge watch officer, was on the watch. She read the report, checked the asset board, and made the assessment in under 30 seconds. The nearest available rotary wing assets were two MH-60S Seahawks from HSC-26, operating on a patrol track 29 nautical miles south of the Pecos's position. 29 nautical miles, at 140 knots, 11 minutes. The nearest fixed-wing combat aircraft were F/A-18Fs at NAS Bahrain, 184 nautical miles away. 22 minutes. Santos diverted the Seahawks at 6:11 a.m. and 58 seconds, 30 seconds after the potential hostile action report arrived. She did not wait for flag authorization. The Rappahannock After Action Review had specifically identified the failure to immediately divert available assets as a contributing factor in that incident. Santos had read the review. She diverted first and reported to Rear Admiral Holloway simultaneously. Holloway acknowledged at 6:12 a.m. and 19 seconds. He authorized the F/A-18F scramble at 6:12 a.m. and 31 seconds. The Seahawks turned north. The Hornets launched. At 6:17 a.m., 6 minutes after the potential hostile action report, the lead Iranian speedboat fired its DShK at 180 meters. The Seahawks were still 5 minutes away. The DShK burst stitched across the Pecos's pump house cladding at 6:17 a.m. and left 7 marks in the steel. No penetration, no casualties, no fire. But the Oilers' .50 caliber gun station was still unmanned when the rounds hit, and the crew member assigned to it, Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Kim, was 40 meters away when he heard the impacts and began moving faster. He reached the gun station at 6:17 a.m. and 31 seconds after the burst. He manned the weapon and trained it on the nearest contact. The nearest contact was the speedboat that had just fired, now at 120 meters and accelerating directly toward the Pecos's hull. Kim had a .50 caliber machine gun, 120 meters of water, and a speedboat closing at 48 knots. At 48 knots, 120 meters takes approximately 5 seconds. Kim fired. The .50 caliber BMG round, 12.7 millimeters, the same caliber the Iranian speedboat had used, is fully capable of penetrating the hull of a fiberglass and aluminum speedboat at 120 meters. Kim's first burst was high, tracers visible passing over the speedboat's cockpit area. The second burst walked down and struck the speedboat's port side forward of the cockpit at approximately 70 meters. The speedboat's driver turned hard to starboard. At 70 meters, the turn was violent enough that 2 crew members aboard the Iranian boat were thrown against the cockpit frame by the lateral G-force. The speedboat cleared the Pecos's hull by approximately 14 meters, close enough that crew members on the Pecos's deck reported seeing individual Iranian crew members before the boat was gone. Kim swung the gun to track the speedboat as it completed its turn and began moving away. He fired 2 more bursts at the retreating contact. Both missed. The second and third Iranian speedboats were now at 300 meters, closing fast. On the Pecos's starboard bow, Webb ordered the ship hard to port, trying to keep the bow, where Kim's gun was mounted, facing the most active threats. At 6:18 a.m. and 44 seconds, 1 minute and 44 seconds after the DShK burst, Webb was managing an unarmored fuel oiler with 1.50 caliber gun against 5 remaining attack craft in open water. Kim was going to run out of targets before Fifth Fleet ran out of Iranian contacts to worry about. The 2 MH-60S Seahawks from HSC-26 arrived at 6:22 a.m., 11 minutes after they were diverted, 5 minutes after the DShK burst. They came in from the south at 150 feet, each helicopter configured with 2 M240D door guns and a forward-firing M60. Not anti-surface missiles, but the door guns are effective against speedboats at the ranges involved. The lead Seahawk, callsign Wildcard 71, descended to 80 feet over the water and made a direct pass at the 2 speedboats approaching the Pecos' starboard bow, flying between the Iranian contacts and the oiler at a speed of 130 knots. At 80 feet and 130 knots, an MH-60S creates a rotor wash that physically affects small, light speedboats at close range. Both Iranian boats broached, losing steering momentarily as the rotor wash and prop wash hit their hulls, and the drivers were forced to cut speed to regain control. In the time it took them to regain control, the Seahawk had turned around for a second pass. Wildcard 72, the second helicopter, took a wider orbit and positioned itself between the Pecos and the 3 remaining Iranian contacts to the northwest, transmitting on all frequencies. All Iranian vessels, this is United States Navy aircraft. You are threatening a U.S. Navy vessel. Break off immediately, or force will be used. The speedboat that Kim had engaged, the first one, now approximately 600 meters northwest, was circling slowly, its speed reduced. Whether from Kim's .50 caliber hits or from mechanical issues caused by the violent turn, the boat was not accelerating back toward the Pecos. The 2 boats that Wildcard 71 had disrupted with its first pass were stationary at 280 meters, their crews wrestling with the wheel. The 3 remaining contacts to the northwest, the ones Wildcard 72 was positioning against, slowed at 400 meters. All 5 remaining Iranian contacts were stationary or near stationary. For 11 seconds, nobody moved. At 6:23 a.m., 11 seconds after the standoff, the DShK boat fired again. 3 rounds at the Seahawk. Wildcard 71 was at 180 meters from the firing contact when the rounds were fired. The helicopter's pilot, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, felt the second round pass close enough to the aircraft's nose section to register on the crew's audio feed as a distinct supersonic crack. She broke left and climbed. Park transmitted immediately. Wildcard 71 were taking fire, 3 rounds, 12.7 millimeters, bearing 178 from Pecos position. Park authorized the door gunner, Petty Officer First Class James Torres, at 6:23 a.m. and 14 seconds. Torres fired a 60-round burst from the M240D at the firing speedboat at 6:23 a.m. and 17 seconds from a range of 220 meters. The burst walked across the speedboat's starboard side. Torres's after-engagement report described 4 confirmed impacts on the hull between the cockpit and the transom. The speedboat's engine stopped, not from the impacts. The Iranian boat's engine compartment was forward of the transom. The engine stop was assessed as the driver cutting the throttle in response to the impacts, not a mechanical kill. The boat drifted. At 6:24 a.m., the 5 remaining Iranian contacts turned northwest. Not together, individually, at different moments, like a unit that had received a stand-down order that arrived in sequence rather than simultaneously. The last contact turned at 6:24 a.m. and 41 seconds. By 6:26 a.m., all 6 Iranian contacts were moving northwest at cruise speed toward the Iranian coast. The FA-18Fs from NAS Bahrain arrived at 6:33 a.m., 16 minutes after the first shots, and established a combat air patrol over the Pecos as it continued southeast toward the Lincoln Strike Group. The Hornets were not needed. The Seahawks had handled it. USNS Pecos arrived at the Lincoln Strike Group's operating area at 22:40 p.m. and conducted the scheduled underway replenishment without incident. The Lincoln's air wing received the fuel it needed for continued operations. The 7 bullet marks on the pump house cladding were documented, photographed, and added to the ship's damage record. They did not require repair. They were cosmetic marks in structural steel. The medal was approved. Lieutenant Commander Park and Petty Officer Torres received written commendations for their actions under fire from the Seahawk. The after-action review of the Pecos incident produced findings that overlapped significantly with the Rappahannock review from months earlier, a fact that the review's introduction noted directly and critically. The first finding was the AIS vulnerability. The Pecos's AIS had been broadcasting its position in compliance with international maritime law. The Iranian speedboats had used that broadcast to plan and execute a precise intercept. The review recommended that Fifth Fleet seek legal and operational guidance on AIS deactivation during high-threat transits for unarmed auxiliary vessels, a deviation from standard practice that required State Department and IMO coordination to implement. The State Department consultation process was initiated. It had not been completed as of the time the review was distributed. The second finding was the gun station response time. Kim had reached the .50 caliber gun station 31 seconds after the first DShK burst. Under the circumstances, 31 seconds was fast, but the review noted that the single .50 caliber gun was the Pecos's entire active defensive capability, and that its being unmanned at the moment of the attack was a condition that should not be the default on a vessel operating in a high-threat environment. The review recommended that unarmed auxiliary vessels in high-threat environments maintain at least one active gun station manned continuously during transits, not just during approach to port or in response to specific contact reports. The recommendation was implemented as a standing order for all Fifth Fleet auxiliary vessels within 30 days. The third finding was the helicopter response time. 11 minutes from potential hostile action report to Seahawks overhead. The review assessed this as within acceptable parameters given asset positioning, but noted that the 5-minute window between the DShK burst and helicopter arrival had been managed by a single petty officer with a machine gun. Kim's performance in those 5 minutes had been the margin. 1 sailor, 1 gun, 5 minutes. The review recommended forward positioning one MH-60 helicopter at Masira Air Base in Oman on a rotational basis during periods of elevated auxiliary vessel activity in the Gulf of Oman, cutting the response time from 11 minutes to approximately 6. The recommendation was approved. The fourth finding was the one nobody wanted to write down, but everyone in the room knew needed to be written. The Pecos had been attacked because the IRGCN knew where it was going, and that it was unarmed. The attack had been planned, resourced, and executed against a target that the IRGCN had assessed as soft, high-value cargo, minimal defensive capability, no organic escort. The review did not assess what would have happened if the speedboats had been equipped with RPGs instead of a DShK, if the weapon used had been capable of penetrating the pump house cladding and initiating a fuel fire. It did not need to. Everyone who read the finding could do that calculation themselves. USNS Pecos returned to Jebel Ali 12 days after the incident for scheduled maintenance. The 7 marks on the pump house cladding were visible to anyone who walked the port side of the ship at frames 89 through 97. The civilian mariners aboard. The 21 men and women who sailed the ship under civilian contracts, not military orders, filed incident reports with their union representatives. 3 requested reassignment to different vessels. Their requests were processed. The other 18 returned to sea. They were not in the Navy. They were not required to be in that part of the world. They chose to be. That fact was noted in the after-action review in a single sentence that nobody had asked to include, and that the reviewing officer added on her own authority. The civilian maritime community that operates Fifth Fleet auxiliary vessels accepts professional risks that this review documents without always receiving the recognition those risks deserve. It was the only sentence in the review that did not have a finding number attached to it. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.